Thomas from Alliance for Gambling Reform, but he's back. Martin, good morning and welcome to The Pulse.
Thanks very much, Rob. Appreciate it. I'm glad it was your mistake and not mine. I'm feeling I hung up on you.
Definitely my error. I've never done that before, but it's every day you probably do something you've never done before, and hopefully that's the last of the ones for today. You found your little media spiel a while ago. This subject is very dear to my heart, and I'd like to again start off by saying a lot of my friends are gamblers and have a great deal of enjoyment out of it, and I certainly don't want to take away their mainly Saturday afternoon hobby of having a flutter on the horses, but we certainly need to have a serious look about the effect gambling is having on our society, particularly around the advertising, but more particularly around the blatant targeting of that advertising to young people. And I suppose the motivation for you to do what you're doing stems from not only that, but also the misery and sadness that gambling leaves many people in.
Yeah, absolutely. We're the Alliance for Reform of Gambling, so we're 100% supportive of you. We're not saying it needs to be banned totally. But what we do know is that we lose, Australians, $25 billion every year to gambling. We are, per capita, the world's biggest losers on gambling. So it does go beyond just the enjoyable punt for a few people. And what we've found is this is an industry that is really predatory and cynical, and there's a phrase that the industry uses which is playing to extinction. They want people to play until they have no more money left. That's the business model, and what we don't know as much about, but we get a fair glimpse, is that if you rip out $25 billion from the community, the level of social harm that causes in debt and stress and marriage breakups and domestic violence and even suicide is extraordinary.
Yeah, I think as we discover all these little social issues, they're bad enough on the individual who's succumbed to it, but the horror stories is the ripple effect on the innocent bystanders, and in most cases that's partner, children, friends who are then put in the awkward positions of, and I know I have my own experience of a friend who started to strangely want to borrow money more and more often, and I never twigged. This is going back 20 years probably before I realised that it became an issue. But from that day on, I realised the horror of it, how it could turn an individual into a lying, scheming, desperate person to keep themselves on track as this disease takes them over.
I was in Canberra with some parliamentarians that support us on this issue, and we heard from a father of a boy who took his life due to gambling, and he actually read from the suicide letter, and it's exactly as you said. There was a level of self-loathing that he had because of the way gambling made him behave, and he just couldn't see any way where he could kick it. And out of, I guess, kindness to his family, he took his own life because he didn't want it to continue. And obviously the family were just so devastated and broken. It was an incredibly raw meeting that we had, and hearing that story, but it just absolutely underlines exactly what you've said, that gambling, the companies spend millions of dollars to make their games addictive, and now with technology, it's not like going down to the pub or the club, it's on your phone, so you can access it 24/7. I've had people talk to me who have lost 100,000 in one night sometimes. And even simple games that we've had previously, where Keno and some lotteries where you could just buy a ticket over the counter at a newsagent's, it's kind of harmless. Now through online technology, you can load up and you can have bets that are $46,000 at a go. So it's all kind of crept up on us, I think, the technology and the insidious nature of it, and the debt that people are getting into is extraordinary.
Now, the job that you have taken on out of need frustrates me, because we actually elect politicians and senior public figures to support social welfare. And this, surely the body of evidence now has got to get back to people in this position. You've spoken about speaking to independent politicians last week, but governing bodies have really got no possible excuse now other than someone is paying us a lot of money to do nothing. When you're up against that, organisations like yours need to be formed. But are you making progress?
Look, I think one of the biggest indications that we are making progress is just the level of public anger that we're seeing towards gambling. Now, we see it towards gambling ads, and it's not surprising. I saw a figure the other day that there was 1 million gambling ads last financial year on free-to-air and radio. People just see it as being the Wild West. They're sick of their children being exposed to it. They're sick of just watching it themselves. It's kind of overtaking all aspects of our sports and our lives. So I think that public anger is important. I think politicians won't do anything, particularly those in power, until there's a real movement for change. I think also being able to give voice to some of the people that are profoundly impacted. And you mentioned not just individuals but families. I had a really heartbreaking conversation with a woman whose husband developed a gambling problem during the lockdown in Victoria, and he subsequently died a little bit later, and she's only still now discovering the huge amount of debts that he racked up, particularly with banks giving him credit cards with $30,000 credit on it with very little questions asked, considering if they did any financial check, they'd find he was in dire straits already. And she's having to unwind that, and she just doesn't know what to tell the two kids, and they're battling desperately to hold on to their house. So there is anger out there. There is, I think, greater acknowledgement of the damage gambling does. And I think also we're seeing politicians. So Peta Murphy, the Labor MP who headed up the parliamentary inquiry at federal level into online gambling, was campaigning. She died of cancer, and she was campaigning in this in her dying days. She really got a hold of just the damage it is doing and wanted to make significant change. Now, her report's still with the government. We've waited almost a year for them to respond to it. But if they do, and if they take on all the 31 recommendations of that report, it will be an absolute game changer.
Yeah, definitely. Another frustration, of course, which is now known and understandable, is media scrutiny. And, of course, along with the ads, you mentioned 1 million of them, they all cost a lot of money. And a lot of media companies around Australia probably balance their books basically on financial return from gambling advertisements. So they're not likely to provide the scrutiny of politicians and gambling organisations as they should, because they're in it up to their eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely. There is incredible vested interest with very deep pockets. So the gambling industry themselves of recent years have emerged as the largest donors to political organisations in the country. And as you say, there is furious lobbying. One of the report I mentioned, one of the key recommendations is a 3-year phased-in total ban on all gambling advertising. It's reasonable, and it's allows time for the change, but it has been, we know it's been furiously opposed by the free-to-air media companies and other vested interests that profit out of the misery of others.
So in this particular space, the community sentiment, if it gets angry enough, it'll change votes. And at this particular stage, I think it's fair to suggest, David and I were talking a little earlier about the opportunity that a lot of people have is only at the ballot box to make a difference. And if a community independent has this as one of the pillars of their campaign, because I don't think anyone from the two major parties is going to campaign on gambling reform. So if you have the opportunity to get someone else in the system to assist the body of politicians that's already working feverishly, it's letters to the parliamentarians, it's getting on social media and protesting. But what other ways can the average, excuse the pun, punter get into the system and let their grievance really be heard?
Well, certainly, I think you've covered the gambit of it. I think, look, today we are still waiting on the government to respond to this Murphy report, and this report will definitely curb gambling harm in Australia if the government takes on all of the recommendations. So anyone that's listening and is angry and concerned about this, they should write to their local MP, they should write to their Prime Minister. If they need a help, get through, there's an info email for the Alliance for Gambling Reform. We can help as well. But if they get inundated with letters that are written by everyday people, as you say, rather than something that's organised by a lobby group or something, they do have power. And I think politicians recognise that if someone's taken the effort to write to them, it probably represents 10 or 100 people that haven't taken the effort. So it doesn't take that many letters to actually feel like, for a politician to feel like there's a real movement for change. So that is absolutely the way to go. I think we need to keep pressure on the major parties, but we also need to look for those candidates that in the past have really championed new issues. I know in South Australia, Nick Xenophon was a terrific campaigner. Outside of politics, our very own Tim Costello is a terrific advocate for us and our cause. And we are seeing independents at federal level, like the Teals and the crossbenchers, really embracing this and understanding that when you don't have a vested interest, when you're not addicted to the revenue that poker machines bring, it's a no-brainer that we need to have some protections.
So you have local members that encompass this area. That will be the Deputy Prime Minister. That would be an office you'd like to get into and make some serious noise. Richard Marles' office in Geelong. Libby Coker's office locally, and Dan Tehan, who's, with the change of boundaries, has pushed right into this region along the surf coast in the electorate of Wannon. So those three people are the three people you need to be rattling the cages of, and all three of them probably need to get a letter, a text, even a visit to the office, if you can do that, and leave your protest, because I'm sure there's a lot more people than just you and I who are concerned about this.
And look, to be honest, we get meetings in terms of the Alliance, but it is we get much less meetings than those in the industry, and it's really the power of the people that is going to change this as well. So, look, the other thing is, if people have been affected by gambling and they want to share their story, in many cases we can do it by protecting their identity as well, particularly young men. If we think that gambling online, young men are the fastest growing group that are getting ensnared by gambling. We'd love to hear from people. We are committed to be able to provide a platform for people to speak firsthand about their pain. It's something for me to talk about and to kind of sprout statistics, but it's completely another thing for someone to tell their story firsthand. It's absolutely indisputable. And we know the pain is deep. We know there's a lot of shame around it, so people don't want to speak out. But where someone is brave and wants to speak, we can do it in a way that protects their identity. But the more stories we can hear from people, the better.
We're speaking with Martin Thomas from Alliance for Gambling Reform. Martin, we can be very critical of politicians who continually deal with lobby groups and get a great deal of benefit from them. But another issue that I have in our society is organisations that beat their chest and profess to be moral crusaders. And we're looking at the NRL, Cricket Australia, particularly the AFL that's on at the moment in this state of Victoria, that doesn't only seem to support the industry, but allows it to be pushed and pushed and pushed. And they obviously get revenue themselves to support these companies, but using the great game of Australian rules football to be part of this addictive drug is something that really does not sit well with me. And they continually try and defend it by saying they need to keep gambling in-house to control it. That sounds like nonsense to me. Does your organisation have much to do with these major sporting bodies?
We are certainly, hopefully, ringing in their ears. We 100% agree with you. It is changing the very nature of the game. We know young people now quite often will go to the football to see if their multi comes in rather than if their team wins. It is fundamentally changing the fabric of the game in this country and of sport across the board. I think there's also this thing that the AFL is virtue signalling in many cases. A few weeks ago they had a minute's silence for women who were hurt in partner violence or killed, and I think that's a terrific initiative, but it's not a great initiative if, at the other hand, they're receiving gambling money, and we know that someone with a gambling problem is in a household likely to have 3 times more likely to have domestic violence or partner violence. So on one hand, they want to be seen as doing the right thing, but every time they take a gambling dollar, it is having profound implications across the community in terms of social harm. Yeah. I think the other thing that's worth just touching on is history is on our side. It wasn't that long ago since we had the Foster's Grand Final. I know we had Benson and Hedges cricket. I think in the NRL up here they had the Rothmans Cup. So cigarette, alcohol advertising, it feels like we're living in the 70s again now. All of that was banned from sport in terms of advertising and sponsorship, and all those codes absolutely survived and continue to thrive. The idea that the AFL can't survive at all without the support of gambling companies is a complete nonsense. There'll be other sponsors that will come in, and what will be proposed, or what's been proposed in this report, is for a 3-year phased-in ban. So it's not like it would blindside them. There would be plenty of time for them to do the right thing and find sponsors that aren't harming the community deliberately.
And again, speaking of deliberate, the other frustration I have is, and I've spoken to parents now that you mentioned the multis in young people, and these are young people that are probably working and can afford to gamble, but when you hear stories back from parents who are talking to their 10, 11 and 12-year-old children who are talking about the footy tips and Hawthorn are $1.12 and their opposition are $1.90, so I'm going to pick Hawthorn. Yeah. That just goes to show the effect that the advertising has had, the advertising that is deliberately targeted to get young people to start thinking about, at least if they don't have the finances to go in and do it. And that is the most insidious thing about this. It is a deliberate targeting campaign on our youth to get them into this horrible culture.
No, you're absolutely right. And the ads that we see on the television and we hear on radio are just what we can see on the surface. It's a little like an iceberg. We know that there is a cynical and massive online campaign where children are essentially groomed to gamble. And we've saw some research done by Deakin University the other day that showed children as young as 14 are getting advertising on their social media, which is encouraging them to download gambling ads. And it is deliberate, and it is targeting, and it is abhorrent.
So again, we go back to what you can do. What you can do is listen carefully to political candidates at elections, the ones that pledge to do something. And I can tell you now, do not listen to the 2 major parties who pledge to do something about it, because as long as they're receiving donations, they will not do anything, and they've proven that over a long, long period of time. And even the Labor Party's own Peta Murphy, as you said, took it upon herself and even continued into her dying days because she was so committed to changing this task. And her party members, who all stood up and talked with great sadness about her passing and what a wonderful representative she was, and have still done nothing or delayed any action on this, is showing me that you're not going to get any support from the 2 major parties. So look at other candidates. You can do it voting, but in the meantime, get to a sitting member's office and shake the bloody cage really, really loudly.
No, absolutely. And look, I think what you've said is 100% right. I think there is still an opportunity for this government to do the right thing in responding to the recommendations of the Murphy report. We live in hope, but we're also realistic. So we hope that enough people make enough noise. And I think there are good people in the major parties on either side. Often they don't have the power and the numbers, and the real politics wins out. But there is an opportunity for Labor and the government and the Prime Minister Albanese to do the right thing on gambling. We sincerely hope he does. We hope he reads the tea leaves on the real anger that's out there in the community and the determination to take back our community from gambling. But at the same time, I think we need to do it all. So I think we need to rattle the cages locally, exactly as you said, but then also be looking for for new parties and new candidates and others that will really take this cause on. We know that we are in for the fight of our lives, and I know my colleague Tim Costello has been campaigning on this for decades. He says, though, that he's seeing more positive signs of change and support for this than he's ever seen in his, I guess, 30 years of lobbying over this. People really do understand and recognise it as an issue. The challenge now is to make our politicians do likewise.
Martin Thomas from Alliance for Gambling Reform, thank you very much. I reckon I might leave you on my speed dial list, and we'll keep in touch and check on progress, because I certainly want to pursue this matter more with our local politicians, both state and federal, because the focus is on federal matters, but certainly state politicians, and I'm sure state governments at some stage get some benefit from this insidious gambling issue. But let's keep singing until we get change, because we need to get change. It just seems to be a normal social acceptance to stop this damage to our society.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
All the best. We'll keep in touch. Martin Thomas, Alliance for Gambling Reform. That is a very, very concerning issue. David.